Hi, my name is Ellen Riccio, and I am a violinist in Rosette, which is a string quartet based here in Richmond. And we're going to play for you in just a moment, and I'm going to tell you a story called Adys Violin. Some of you might have heard my story, Adys' American Adventure, a few months ago. Well, this is the sequel to that story. But before we begin, I wanted to say a big thank you to Chesterfield County Public Library for making this performance possible. So I hope you enjoy Adys Violin. It was Susie's 10th birthday. She had braided her hair into 2 matching pigtails, one for each digit of her new age. She ate her usual breakfast of oatmeal with milk before heading out to the farm to do her morning chores. First, she milked the cow. Then she collected eggs from the chickens. Then she fed the pigs. As she set about pulling up weeds from the garden, Susie began thinking about the horse she'd wanted since she was 7 years old. Her father always said she was too little, but now that she was 10, she simply had to be big enough. There was nothing in the world she wanted more than a reddish-brown horse with a yellow mane and a little white mark on its forehead. And, "Susie, come and get it!" It was her father. Most folks knew him as Oddie the Fiddler because he brought his violin to every hoedown, shindig, and hootenanny, and everyone from the children to the grandparents would dance to his tunes. "Coming!" shouted Susie. Was it already time for lunch? She quickly washed her face and hands at the water pump and ran to the house. Sitting on the kitchen table next to her father was an old, dusty violin. "What's that?" asked Susie. "This was my very first violin," said Oddie. "I got it when I was 10 years old, and now I want you to have it." "Oh," said Susie, trying to hide her disappointment. "Don't you like it?" said Oddie. "Of course I do," said Susie, trying valiantly not to think about the horse. She crossed the room to take a closer look at the instrument and saw that there were several scratches and worn-down edges. There was even a small chunk missing out of the side. "Why, this violin must be at least 40 years old," she said. "At least," Oddie laughed. "What if I told you that this violin was over 200 years old?" Susie's eyes grew wide. "Well, it's true. This violin was made in 1725 in Cremona, Italy, by the great violin maker Antonio Stradivari. He spent weeks and weeks carving and sanding and gluing and varnishing. Until he was finally satisfied. He sold the violin to a red-haired priest from Venice named Antonio Vivaldi. Vivaldi was the maestro di violino at an orphanage for girls. He taught all of the children to play instruments and wrote music for them to perform. Together, they gave the most astounding concerts. Vivaldi played the violin for many years, Adys continued, but eventually he sold it to a German composer named Telemann. But Telemann wasn't just a composer. He was also a poet, a botanist, and a mathematician. He liked to play musical tricks, like writing pieces for two violins where the second violin plays the exact same thing as the first violin, only a little bit later. Pretty neat, huh? Said Adys. Well, eventually, Telemann sold the instrument to a violinist in the court orchestra of Prince Nicholas Esterhazy, whose Austrian palace was one of the grandest in all of Europe. Prince Nicholas had his very own puppet theater, opera theater, and full-time orchestra. He even hired a composer named Franz Joseph Haydn to write music just for him. Every Tuesday at 2 o'clock, the prince would get to hear Haydn's latest symphonies and string quartets. Think of it, Prince Nicholas listening to this very violin. The next person to play the violin was the greatest virtuoso the world had ever seen. Niccolo Paganini had long arms and fast fingers that flew up and down the fingerboard, dazzling audiences first in Italy and then all over Europe. His performances were incredibly passionate. On one occasion, he got so carried away that he took a small chunk out of the violin with his bow. But the passion of Paganini could not be stopped. He even wrote his own music in order to show off his special techniques. For instance, he could play 3 notes at once. He sometimes played entire melodies on one string. He could pluck the string with his left hand. "Dad," interrupted Susie, "I didn't know you could do all that cool stuff." "I have a feeling you're in for a few more surprises," said Adys. "You see, after Paganini died in 1840, the violin was purchased by a wealthy German named Franz. Franz had made his fortune building railroads, but he'd always had a special place in his heart for music. Every Sunday evening, he and his friends played chamber music by candlelight. They never performed in front of an audience, they just did it because they loved it. And their favorite piece to play was this one by Beethoven. Wow, that really sounds like fun, said Susie. Oh, they had a grand old time, said Adys. But let me introduce you to the next important character in our story. From a young age, Franz's son showed a keen interest in music. Every Sunday night, he sat on the floor between the musicians as they played, and he would hum the melodies around the house all through the week. He began taking violin lessons at age 8, and when he was 18, he was accepted into the Moscow Conservatory. Playing his father's violin, Franz Jr. excelled in school. One of his professors, Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky, was especially impressed with Franz Jr. Years later, when Tchaikovsky needed another violinist for the premiere of his ballet Swan Lake, who do you think he called? That's right. As the dancers leaped and twirled on the stage above him, Franz Jr. was grinning from ear to ear. Franz Jr. played in many performances of Swan Lake, as well as other Russian ballets throughout his career. But when he died, he left the violin to his son, Rudy. Sadly, Rudy did not inherit his father's talent or even his grandfather's love for music. He preferred to spend his time gambling, playing cards, and going to parties. Eventually, he racked up a gambling debt so big that he could not repay it. Desperate and not sure what else to do, he decided to visit a fortune teller. The fortune teller's hair flowed down past her waist, and her dark eyes lit up as she looked into her crystal ball. I see a long life, she said. Long, but lonely. You have no friends, no family, and no fortune. I knew it, cried Rudy. I've been destined for failure all my life. My father was a poor man who left me nothing save for this old violin, and I'll never be able to repay my debt. Let me see this violin, said the fortune teller. Still drying his eyes with a handkerchief, Rudy handed the violin to the woman. She looked it over carefully, running her fingers along the edges and plucking each string. Then her eyes locked on the missing chunk. My husband will buy this from you, she said. Then you will be able to pay your debt and have a different destiny, a chance at a new life. Rudy couldn't believe his luck. He took the money and disappeared into the night. The fortune teller's husband couldn't believe his luck either. He knew what a special violin this was. But then he was a special violinist. He could make the violin cry, sing, and even laugh. When he played, everyone in the village danced. interrupted Susie. "That's kind of like you, Dad. When you play the violin, people can't help but smile and dance." "Well, there's a reason for that," said Adys. "You see, the fortune teller was my mother, and the violinist was my father. They were Romani, people who were mistreated wherever they went, so they were constantly on the move. People called them gypsies because they thought they came from Egypt, so no matter what, they were always outsiders. That's why my dad could make the violin cry." Susie cradled the violin in her arms and thought about her father, her grandparents, ungrateful Rudy, and all of the interesting people who had played it over the last 225 years. "Dad," she said, "this is the best birthday present a girl could ever get. Do you think I could learn to play the violin just like you?" "I think it's in your blood," said Adys. "Well, the first thing you have to do is lift up your chin ever so slightly. There you go. Now, this is the bow. This is how you make sound. Slowly draw the bow across the string. Not bad. Isn't it amazing that the hair on the bow comes from the tail of a horse? Why, you could probably use Henrietta's tail in a pinch." "Wait, who's Henrietta?" asked Susie. "Oh, didn't I tell you?" asked Adys, his eyes twinkling. "Henrietta is our new horse. She'll be arriving on the farm tomorrow morning." Susie squealed with joy. "And just when I thought this birthday couldn't get any better." Adys smiled. "What do you say we celebrate with a good old-fashioned fiddle tune?" And that, my friends, is how Susie turned 10, playing a fiddle tune with her father, eagerly awaiting the arrival of Henrietta, and writing the first page in the newest chapter in the story of the old dusty violin.